open the file materials.max. This file contains the bedroom that we have been working on in the previous parts. In this file, there are V-Ray physical cameras, a V-Ray sun, V-Ray lights and V-Ray IES lights. I have assigned a grey color to the entire scene since we will now explore the materials together. As far as the rendering settings are concerned, I am using the progressive image sampler and I have set to do 5-minute test renders. We have said that the renders we will get will be pretty noisy, but this is fine for the testing phase that we are in. If you want, you can also set to do 10 or 15-minute tests, if you want to see, let's say, clearer renders. Let's hit the render button to see what we get so far. The render we get is too bright, so let's add the exposure layer and reduce both the exposure and the highlight burn value. That's better. As I said, the entire scene has a light grey color and we will start creating one by one the materials. In order to create a material, we need to open the material editor. To do so, click on the Material Editor button from the main toolbar or click the M button from your keyboard. There are two interfaces to the Material Editor, the Slate, which is this one, and the Compact Material Editor. To switch between the two, click on the menu Modes in the Material Editor and select the look you want. Let's click on the Compact to also see how it looks. I personally only use the Slate Material Editor, but I see that there are many 3D artists who for some reason prefer the Compact, so at the end of this part I will also analyze the Compact so that you can choose which interface you prefer. The Slate Material Editor has three main columns: the Material Browser, the Active View, and the Parameter Editor. To create a material, select it from the Material Browser, drag it to the Active View, and you will see its parameters in the third column. More specifically, go to the Material Browser, go to Materials, then V-Ray, and select and drag the V-Ray MTL in the Active View, View 1. The V-Ray material is the typical material that V-Ray offers. In the Active View, the material appears as a node. This is the material's preview, the material's name, and I will explain this shortly. Double-click anywhere on the node and the material's settings open the Material Parameter Editor. Another way to create a V-Ray material is to right-click in the Active View and select Materials, V-Ray, V-Ray MTL. You can click, hold and drag to reposition a material in the Active View. Moreover, we can zoom in, zoom out or pan in the Active View. When you don't want a material, simply select it and hit the Delete button from your keyboard. Let's say that we want to create the wood finish that will go to the wardrobe, the coffee table, the cabinets, and the slats. First, let's resize the Material Editor and move it so that we can see both the Material Editor and our objects. Now, click on the circle you see on the right side of the Material node, hold it, drag and drop it on the wardrobe. We don't see any difference because the default V-Ray material is a grey color and I have already assigned a grey color to the scene, so you can't see the difference. Let's go to the material's parameters. Double-click anywhere on the node and we can see the settings on the third column. Up here is the material's name. V-Ray automatically names every new material we create, but we can come here and type the name we want, let's say wood. When I type the name here, it automatically renames the node in the active view. Go to the basic parameters rollout. From the diffuse section, we set the color of our object. So what we need to do is to click on the diffuse color and select the desired color. Just picked one randomly now. Then we can go to the whiteness section and adjust how dark or bright the color will look. Any changes we make, we can see them real time in the viewport since we have assigned this material to the wardrobe. So now that we can distinguish our material, let's go and assign it to the other wooden surfaces as well. Let me repeat the process. We click on the circle we see on the right side of the material node, hold, drag and drop it on our object. Many get confused and try to drag the whole material onto the object, something like this, but believe me, this won't work. Doing that will just reposition the material in the material editor. Another way to assign a material is to select our object, let's say these slats, click on our material to activate it, and then click on the fourth button in the material editor, the Assign Material to Selection. As the name of the command says, the material is assigned to the selected object. The Slate Material Editor is a quite big dialog box, so you will see me keep moving it around while I'm working on the materials so that doesn't block the viewport. This is kind of annoying at the beginning, but you will get used to it after working on a few projects. Let's also assign the material to the cabinets and to the wooden walls. So far, we have just applied a color to the objects, but we said that we want to create a wood material. So the wood, it isn't just a simple color, but it's a texture. How do we add a texture? Next to the color field, there is a small button. Click on it and the Material Map browser opens. Go to Maps, V-Ray, and choose V-Ray Bitmap. Now, if you are using an older version of V-Ray, then you won't see the V-Ray bitmap here. In this case, you need to go to Maps, General, and choose Bitmap. I will choose the V-Ray bitmap and hit OK. Now, another node appears in the active view, the V-Ray bitmap, and it is connected to the diffuse map with a wire. So here, it informs us that our material has a bitmap assigned to the diffuse parameter. Moreover, in the settings next to the diffuse color, we see the letter M, map. Double-click on the V-Ray bitmap node to open its parameters. So, wherever we double-click, we see that node's parameters on the third column of the material editor. If I double-click on the V-Ray material, I see its parameters here. If I double-click on the V-Ray bitmap, I now see its parameters here. Go to the Parameters rollout, and next to the bitmap setting, click on the three dots button. Go to the folder with the materials and select the wood texture that I have provided. Now you can see a preview of the wood in the active view. But in our viewport, the furniture still looks like a plain color. And if I hit the render button, they render as wood. So, every time we add a texture, we need to select the V-Ray bitmap node and click on the Show Shaded Material in Viewport button. Now we can see the shaded material, our bitmap, in the viewport as well. But even if you forget to enable this button, V-Ray will render the bitmap. If you see how the wood applies on the objects, I would like it to change direction and basically rotate by 90 degrees. To do so, go to the V-Ray bitmap parameters and find the coordinates rollout. Go to the angle and type in the W field the desired rotation. We will type 90 degrees. And now, that's great. If we want to adjust the scale of the texture, go to the coordinates rollout and play with the tiling. If I make it 2 by 2, the size of the texture is reduced by 50%. If I make it 0.5 by 0.5, I double the size. You don't have to put the same values. I can have this 1 and make this 1.5 to only squeeze the texture's width. Moreover, instead of typing a value, we can play with the arrows. Let me take this back to 1 by 1. When you work on the materials, for me it's crucial that you do crop renders to save time. So let me go to the render setup dialog box and do a crop render here. The wardrobe does look like wood, but it is pretty flat. For a material to render realistic, we need to apply more attributes than just assigning a texture on the diffuse map. Go to the material editor and to the V-Ray materials parameters. Up until now, we have seen the diffuse color and the diffuse map. Now, let's move on to the reflect color and the reflect map. How does reflect work? Click on the reflect color. When reflect is black, our material is matte. It doesn't reflect. The lower I go towards white, the more reflective my material will get. So if I set it to white, I will get a very reflective surface. Let's make the reflect color white and render. Let me repeat it one more time. When reflect is black, the material is matte. It doesn't reflect. The lower I go towards white, the more reflective my material will get. And you see that when the reflect color is white, we have a very reflective wood. I can see here the bed reflecting on this side of the wardrobe. In the front, you can't really see it because you don't have any objects to reflect on it, just the floor that reflects on the wardrobe down here. When we see the reflections, they are clear. What do I mean by that? That we can clearly understand what reflects on our surface. So, if I take a look at here, I can see that this is the bed. A material can have different types of glossiness, of reflectivity. It can be a polished finish, where the reflections are clear, or it can have a satin finish, where the reflections are blurred. So it is still a reflective finish, but you can't understand what is being reflected on it. How do we convert a polished finish to a satin one? Through the glossiness value in the reflect section. When the glossiness is 1, we have a polished finish. The lower we go, the blurrier the reflections will get. Let's try 0.8 and render. Now, the wood is glossy, but we can't understand anymore that this is the bed that is being reflected here. Well, maybe we can if we pay a lot of attention, and even then we can go even lower to 0.6, let's say. But I like the result I get here. So you can see that the moment we added some reflections to our material and adjusted the reflective glossiness, we got a really nice wooden finish. Let's now render the full viewport to see how the other wooden objects also render. Don't forget that we can reduce the reflectivity of a material by going to the reflect color and instead of white, making it gray. Let me set it to a medium gray, a value of 135, and do one more render. Now, the wood is still reflective, but not as much as it was before. Instead of a color, we can assign a texture to the reflect setting. How does a texture work in reflect? We need to choose a grayscale or black and white texture. And the philosophy is the same as when applying a color. Where V-Ray sees black, it will make that part of the object matte. Where it sees white, it will make it very reflective. And where it sees grey, it will adjust it accordingly. So, when we use a texture in the reflect setting, we achieve variety in the reflections instead of the whole surface to render the same. We can either click on the box next to the reflect color and choose V-Ray bitmap, or we can go to the Material Map browser, go to Maps, V-Ray, and drag the V-Ray bitmap in the active view, and then connect it to the reflect map. Let me select this and delete it. Another way is to right-click and choose Maps, V-Ray, V-Ray bitmap, and connect it to the reflect map. Finally, we can select this V-Ray bitmap, hold the Shift key and drag it. It's like when we clone an object and then connect it to the reflect map. You see, there are several ways to do the same thing. I want you to start getting familiar with the material editor, so start trying all these options to get comfortable with it. So I have copied the diffuse map here, but as we said, we need to put a grayscale image. Double-click on the V-Ray bitmap node that connects to the reflect map to open its parameters. Click on the three dots button next to the bitmap to choose another image. I have prepared 3 different grayscale textures for you. Let's start with the wood ref. In order to see how it applies to the wardrobe, select the grayscale V-Ray bitmap and click on the Show Shaded Material in Viewport button. So we also need to rotate this texture by 90 degrees. And actually, put this back to 0. It keeps the same settings as the bitmap we copied. In this texture, the grey hues are very similar to each other, and this means that the variation to the reflectivity will be pretty smooth. The darker greys will reflect less, the lighter greys will reflect more, but the colors here are pretty similar to each other, so the result will be very smooth. You won't really see the difference. Let's also right-click in the preview and select Open Preview window and increase it so that you can see how our material adjusts depending on the selected texture. Now, let's click again on the 3 dots and select the second image, the wood ref 2. In this image, I have increased the contrast, and so the difference between the dark and the bright areas is more noticeable. Here, you see that there are areas that reflect and areas that are matte, and there is a random pattern between the two. Let's now try the third texture, wood ref 3. Here, I have increased the contrast even more, and now we get the feeling of a dirty texture of an old used wood. Depending on the look you are after, you load the respective texture on the reflect map. Let's do a test with the wood ref 3 to see how it looks on our wardrobe. And now let me delete the bitmap. I want to keep the color I had. Let's also select the diffuse bitmap and click on Show Shaded Material in Viewport to see again our wood texture. To sum up, to create a wood texture, load the texture you want on the diffuse map, then go and play with the reflectivity. Either set a color or load a grayscale texture depending on the look you are after. Double-click on the wood material and scroll down to find the map's rollout. Here is a list of all the maps we can load, and it's the same list we see in the active view below the name of our material. Next to its bitmap and setting, you see a percentage and a checkbox. If I disable the checkbox, I am asking V-Ray to ignore the texture I loaded and give priority to the color I have set. Let's enable it back. If I make the percentage 50, then I am asking V-Ray to blend 50% of the texture and 50% of the color I have set in the diffuse color. If I make it 80, then I blend 80% of the texture and 20% of the color. So, if I want to make my wood one tone darker, I can make the diffuse color black and make the percentage here 90 or 80. And you can see in the preview that it gets darker and darker. Let me take this back to 100. We are all done with the wood texture and now we are ready to move on to the next material, the headboard fabric. Go to the material editor, let's pan and push this aside to create a new V-Ray material. Double click on it and rename it to fabric. Let's add a texture to the diffuse map. Select the fabric diffuse. Assign the fabric material to the headboard. Click on the Show Shaded Material command and let's also assign it to the armchairs, the bed base, some of the pillows and on the window pillows. Hit render. I believe this is looking beautiful, so contrary to the wood material, we get a realistic fabric just by adding a texture to the diffuse map, simply because this type of material doesn't have any reflections. If we want it to be velvet, then we would have to add many more attributes than just the diffuse map. Let's create one more fabric to apply to the curtains. And let's do a crop render. When we do crop renders, if we want to see a bigger preview, we can increase the resolution. Up here, you can see the resolution of this render. If we go to the render setup, we may have set here 1285 by 800, but since we do a crop render, it renders only part of the window. First, make sure to enable the lock and then let's make the height 1100 pixels. The width adjusts automatically. Now the preview window got bigger and I can see the fabric better. If I type 1500 pixels, although I increased the size, the preview looks smaller. Why is that? When up here you see 50%, this means that the render you see here is 50% smaller than what is actually being calculated. It shows the 50% preview, but it calculates 100% of the resolution we have asked. This happens because my screen's resolution is smaller than the one I set for my render and it can't fit it in. I hope it makes sense. Let me take this back to 800 pixels. Let's create a new V-Ray material. And let me reposition it below the others. Personally, I prefer to put one material below the other since on the left side of its material I need space for other nodes that I may need to connect to the materials. Double-click anywhere on the new V-Ray material and open its parameters. Let's rename it to glass. Most young artists forget to double-click on the new material and so they go and adjust the wrong material. This will happen to you many times, but at the end you will learn, believe me. Just try to be careful and to always double-click first on the material you are about to adjust. In the basic parameters rollout, next to the diffuse color, we see the preset setting. If we click on the custom button, a drop-down menu appears that contains some pre-made materials that V-Ray offers. Let's select glass. The preview adjusts and gets transparent. Let's apply this material to the bathroom doors and to the vases on the nightstand and the glass on our coffee table. It's like the objects disappeared because the material is clear glass. Let's do a render. These pre-made materials are really good, especially to use them as a base. You see how quick it was to create a glass, and then we can go and adjust their settings based on what we want to achieve. Let's play around a bit with our glass. Open the material editor and double-click on the glass to open its settings. We have talked about the diffuse and the reflect, so now let's see the next parameter here, the refract. Refract has the same philosophy as the reflect setting, which means that when the refraction color is black, our object will be solid, there will be no opacity. If the refraction color is white, our object will be fully transparent, like here with the clear glass. And we play with the values in between to adjust the transparency of our material. If instead of white we make the refraction color a gray one, let's say a value of 180, now we can see the objects in the viewports, and if we render, they are semi-transparent. That's how we also create a colored glass. We put in the diffuse the color we want, we make the reflection white, since the glass is a reflective material, and we play around with the refraction color depending on how transparent we want our material to look. Later on, I will show you more techniques on glasses. Let's now move on to our floor. You should know how to make it by yourself based on what we have said so far, but let's see it together. Create a new V-Ray material. Let's apply a texture to the diffuse map. You can either set the reflections as a color or add a texture. I will make it a light gray, a value of 164, and I will set the reflective glossiness to 0.8 to blur the reflections. Let's produce a render to see how it looks. Let's now see the mirror finish. Create a V-Ray material and rename it to mirror. A mirror is a fully reflective surface, so we don't really care what color the diffuse has, even if it's red, green, or blue, since it reflects fully the color of the surface won't be visible. Since it reflects fully, the color of the surface won't be visible. Go to the reflect color and set it to white. This way, our surface will reflect a lot but not fully. It won't look like a mirror. To get the mirror effect, we also need to disable the Fresnel reflections. You will understand this better on the part where I analyze how to create the various metals in V-Ray. Let's apply it on the mirror and do a crop render. That's great. The next material we will see is the view we have outside the windows. We could follow the same steps and create a V-Ray material and apply the photo we have outside the windows. Actually, let's do that. This looks good, but sometimes you may have a problem if you follow this technique, because depending on your scene and on the result you are after, you may want to adjust the brightness, the illumination of your background. That's why, for my backgrounds, personally, I always use the V-Ray light material. Let's see it. Go to the material editor, right click in the active view and choose Materials, V-Ray, V-Ray Light MTL. As its name implies, it's a V-Ray material that also casts light. Let me double click to see its settings. Next to the color, click on the No Map button, choose V-Ray bitmap, and select the background photo. Or simply drag this V-Ray bitmap and connect it to the light color, since we loaded earlier in the V-Ray material. Let's apply it to our background. Click on the V-Ray bitmap and click on the Show Shaded material and select to see it on the V-Ray light material. And although we have enabled the command, we can't see the image in the viewport. It shows as a white illuminated color. But let's render, and here we can see the photo. So this is a bug. In order to see the photo, make the color instead of white, black. And now we can see the photo in the viewport. I usually enable the compensate camera exposure option to match the exposure of the camera to our background. And then I play with the value next to the color. So let's first render with value 1. Our background looks quite dark. If we type 10, it will make the background 10 times brighter, and so on. And so we can adjust the brightness of our background photo. If you go to the floor plan, you will see that I have created 2 planes to apply a background photo. One here, which is visible from V-Ray Cam 001, and one here, so that if we set a camera inside the bathroom facing this wall, we can see what is outside these windows. Let's also do a render here. Applying what we have said so far, I want you to assign materials to the remaining objects of our scene. At the end, we want to get this result. So create a black metal and assign it to the blinds, the ceiling tracks, the floor lamp, the pendants and the switches. Make a fabric for the pillows and the bed throw, and so on. Feel free to improvise and change the materials to the ones you would like and send me to see your results.